Hello there, I'm Ishoas Visaha, a chemistry instructor at Kelebawiyan International Academy. How are you doing? As usual, today we're going to revise the fourth unit of grade 11 chemistry, which is entitled Chemical Kinetics. I'm sure this revision session will help you a lot. Let's get started. Chemical kinetics. Chemical kinetics is the area of chemistry concerned with the speeds or rates at which reactions occur. The word kinetic suggests movement or change. Well, from your lower grade chemistry classes, you learned a lot about chemical reactions. For instance, not all chemical reactions proceed at equal speed. For instance, rusting of iron could start while ripening of fruits may be completed in a few days. On the other hand, weathering of stone may take more than a decade, and the breakdown of plastics in the environment takes more than 100 years. However, other reactions like the combustion of gasoline or the explosion of gunpowder occur in a few seconds. Now, having said this much about chemical kinetics, particularly its definition, now let's pose one general question that all of you are accustomed to. Well, that question is, what is made by a chemical reaction? Can you say a few words about what a chemical reaction is all about? Well, it's a very simple question, because all of you know what it is. Well, let's say a few words about what a chemical reaction is. A chemical reaction is a process in which one or more substances, also called reactants, are converted to one or more different substances, known as products. So a chemical reaction rearranges the constituent atoms of the reactants to create different substances as products. So this is the mere definition of the term chemical reaction. Now, whenever the issue of chemical reaction is raised, then another important point follows this, and that is the issue of the two different types of chemical reactions, namely reversible and irreversible types of chemical reactions. So it's important to go through the distinction that lies there between reversible and irreversible chemical reactions. Again, let me pose a very simple question. What distinction lies there between these two types of chemical reactions? Do you have any idea? Well, your answer is yes. So if your answer is yes, now let's go through the clear distinction that is there between reversible and irreversible types of chemical reactions. Well, irreversible chemical reactions can occur in only one direction. The reactants can change the products, but the products cannot change back to the reactants. So always, whenever we have such a chemical reaction which occur only in one direction, then we'll automatically consider that sort of chemical reaction as an irreversible type of chemical reaction. Whereas when we come to the second type of chemical reaction, which is called reversible, well, a reversible type of chemical reaction is the opposite of the aforesaid type of chemical reaction, which is called an irreversible type of chemical reaction. So when we say reversible chemical reaction, well, a reversible type of chemical reaction can occur in both directions. It means the reactants can change to the products, and after some time, the products can also change back to the reactants. So this is the clear distinction that is there between reversible and irreversible type of chemical reactions. Well, let's just mention one example. Well, consider a flask that contains the following three things, namely hydrogen, iodine, and hydrogen iodide. So the hydrogen iodide, which is Hi, is decomposing more rapidly than the hydrogen and the iodine. Well, and normally these two, namely hydrogen and iodine, can combine to produce hydrogen iodide. So the chemical equation representing the formation of hydrogen iodide from this reaction of hydrogen and iodine is represented as H2 gas plus I2 gas yields 2Hi, again gas. So the rate of appearance of Hi in the above reaction is defined as the rate of reaction from left to right. For the displacement of Hi, well, we have 2Hi in the form of gas decomposes or goes to H2 gas and I2 gas. So the rate of disappearance of HI is then defined as the rate of reaction from right to left. A point that must be paused here in connection with a chemical reaction is rate of reaction. So what is meant by rate of reaction? Well, rate of reaction can be defined as the change in concentration of a reactant or a product over a given period of time. So a change in concentration of a reactant or a product over a given period of time is simply referred to as rate of reaction. During the course of a reaction, the concentrations of the reactants decrease while those of the products increase. Thus, the rate of a reaction is calculated by dividing the change in the concentrations of reactants or products by the time taken for the change to occur. Well, another essential or another vital point that must be raised in connection with a chemical reaction is determination of rate of reaction. Well, whenever we are in a chemistry laboratory, we conduct different experiments. So, say for example, when we commingle or when we mix up two chemicals, then let's consider that those two stuffs or those two substances that are about to be commingled are reactants. Then after those reactants are put together, for sure a chemical reaction will take place. But let's pose one very important question here. How do students or how do people know whether a chemical reaction takes place in a particular chemistry laboratory? Meaning, what are some of the signs that we see or that people see and say that, well, a particular chemical reaction has taken place? Well, it's a very simple question because in your lower grades, you say a lot about this. Particularly when you learn about chemical reactions, you also learn about those signs or those things or those indicators that help us to know whether a particular chemical reaction takes place in a chemistry laboratory or not. So what are those? What are those things that easily be seen right after a particular chemical reaction takes place? Well, the following are some of the indicators that help us to know whether a particular chemical reaction takes place or not. The first is change of color. So whenever we see a color change, then we can confidently say that a chemical reaction takes place. The second is volume of gas evolved. Gas evolution is another indicator. The third indicator is amount of precipitate formed, and I'm sure you know what a precipitation is, right? So a precipitation in chemistry, of course, the word precipitation does have different meanings, but here we're specifically looking at the meaning of precipitation only in connection with chemistry. So the term precipitation literally refers to those solid substances, right, that appear at the bottom of a test tube. So sometimes whenever we see the bottom of a particular test tube after we commingle or after we mix up two chemicals, then we may see kind of solid substances right under the test tube. So normally those things or those solid particles that are vividly seen at the bottom of a test tube can simply be referred to as precipitation. So whenever we see precipitation formation, then we can again say that a particular chemical reaction has already taken place. And loss or gain of mass. Well, another indicator is this, right? So loss or gain of mass can be regarded as one of the indicators of chemical reactions. So let's sum up not all, but some of the indicators of a chemical reaction. Well, the first is emission of lighter heat. The second is formation of a gas, meaning evolution of gas. 3, formation of a precipitate. 4, color change. And 5, emission of odor. So in general, whenever we see one or two of the aforementioned indicators in a laboratory or in a laboratory setting, then we can automatically say that, well, a particular chemical reaction has taken place. And a good example for this is the formation of ammonia right after the combinations of hydrogen and nitrogen. Well, you know that when hydrogen combines with nitrogen, always, the reaction will ultimately help us to get a new product, and of course that new product is called ammonia. So the moment ammonia is produced in a laboratory, the formation of ammonia can easily be detected by the pungent latrine smell that is formed in a laboratory. So the moment students smell that pungent latrine smell, then they can automatically say that ammonia is formed. So how do students know whether ammonia is formed in a laboratory? Well, students can easily know whether ammonia is formed in a laboratory or not by simply sensing the smell of ammonia. So ammonia has a very disgusting smell. So this can be regarded as one of the good examples of the indicators of chemical reactions. The other vital point that must also be raised here in connection with chemical reactions is the factors that influence the reaction rates. So here, let me ask you one simple question. Can you mention some of the factors that directly influence, chemical reaction or simply a reaction rate? Well, in chemistry, there are some 4 or 5 important factors, and already these factors do have a direct influence on any chemical reaction. So different chemical reactions have different rates. Even a chemical reaction involving the same reactants may have different rates under different conditions. So now let's attempt to mention some of the factors that influence reaction rates or a chemical reaction. But before that, if I ask you a very simple question which says list some 4 or 5 factors that directly influence the rate of a particular chemical reaction, then can you mention? I'm sure you can. So the following are some of the factors. The first factor is temperature. Well, as you well know, temperature has a direct connection with a particular chemical reaction. The second is concentration. And of course, concentration, like temperature, does also have a direct connection with a particular chemical reaction. 3, nature of reactants, another very important factor. The other vital factor is surface area and availability of a catalyst. So at least, or when you're asked to mention some factors that directly influence any chemical reaction, then you must be able to mention the following, at least 5. So what are these factors in general? Well, the first is temperature, the second is concentration, the third is nature of reactants, the fourth is surface area, and the last one is availability of a catalyst. Now, let's have a look at each one by one, and let's see how they can directly affect the rate of a particular chemical reaction. Well, let's get started. Well, the first is nature of reactants. Well, let's begin our discussion with that. Nature of reactants. So, under similar conditions, the rates of different chemical reactions differ simply because of the nature of reactants themselves. What do I mean here? Well, let me give you an example. If hydrochloric acid is added to pieces of magnesium and iron of equal size and shape, the reaction of magnesium with hydrochloric acid is much more vigorous. Okay? And why? This is because magnesium is more reactive than iron. This is due to the nature of the two metals. So, nature of reactants can simply be understood this way. So that's why we've said that nature of reactants can easily be regarded as one of the factors that directly affects the rate or the rates of chemical reactions. Well, the second factor is called surface area. So surface area, meaning how does surface area affect the rate or the rates of chemical reactions? Well, let's have a look at it. Well, surface area affects largely the rates of heterogeneous reactions, Meaning, what do we mean here when we say heterogeneous reactions? Reactions involving reactants existing in different states. So here, remember, surface area does have a direct connection with those heterogeneous reactions, meaning reactions involving reactants existing in different states. but on the contrary, it has very little or no influence on the rate of a homogeneous reaction. And here again, what do we mean when we say homogeneous reaction? Homogeneous reaction refers to a reaction that involves reactants in the same phase or state. So as far as surface area is concerned, two reactions must automatically pop up on our mind. Well, the first is heterogeneous reactions and the second is homogeneous reactions. So what major distinction lies there between the two? Well, I've already explained. So as in the case of heterogeneous reactions, well, normally heterogeneous reactions are those reactions which involve the existing of different states, which involve reactants that exist in different states. But a homogeneous reaction, it refers to a reaction that involves reactants in the same phase or state. So here's a question. Surface area specifically affects which group of reactions? Heterogeneous reactions or homogeneous reactions? Well, your answer must be surface area affects largely the rates of heterogeneous reactions, meaning reactions that involve reactants existing in different states. And the third one is concentration. Well, concentration does also the rate of any chemical reaction. So let's say how concentration affects the rate of a chemical reaction. The rate of reaction can be increased by increasing the concentrations of the reactants. Lowering the concentration has the opposite effect. Increasing the concentration of a reactant per unit volume increases the number of possible collusions between particles, and the rate of the reaction is thereby increased. So here, when we lower the concentration, well, a particular result is going to be gotten, but this result is the opposite of increasing the concentration of reactants. So what do we mean here? Well, whenever we increase the concentration of a reactant per volume or per unit volume, well, this increases the number of possible collusions between particles, and the rate of the reaction is thereby increased. So concentration and a particular chemical reaction are directly proportional. So when we increase the concentration of reactants, normally this does also increase the number of possible collusions between particles. But when we decrease or when we lower the concentration, well, a number of possible collusions between particles will also decrease. So concentration, or normally this is how concentration affects the rate of a particular chemical reaction. Well, the fourth one is temperature. So how does temperature affect the rate of a particular chemical reaction? Well, temperature, particularly a rise in temperature, increases the rate of any reaction, and a decrease in temperature generally decreases the rate of a particular chemical reaction. So like concentration, well, when we come to temperature, normally temperature does also have a direct connection, or temperature is directly proportional to rate of chemical reaction, meaning when temperature increases, rate of reaction increases, and when temperature decreases, rate of reaction decreases. Therefore, temperature has a direct relationship with rate of chemical reaction. Well, the other is catalyst. Right, catalyst. So in your lower grades again, well, you learned about catalysts, right? Well, normally a catalyst, or generally catalysts, are substances that alter the rate of chemical reactions without themselves appearing in the final product of the reaction. So this is the mere meaning, or this is the simple definition of the word catalyst or catalysts. So how do catalysts affect the rate of a particular chemical reaction? Well, the reaction between hydrogen and oxygen gas to produce water in the absence of a flame is so slow that even a single drop of water will not be formed in 10 million years. But on addition of powdered platinum, meaning powdered platinum here acts as a catalyst, to the hydrogen-oxygen mixture, then the rate of the reaction increases so tremendously that water will be formed in a fraction of seconds. You see, here a catalyst, the presence of a catalyst, speeds up the reaction that is there between a hydrogen atom and an oxygen atom so as to produce, or so as to yield, water. So for instance, if we simply commingle these two molecules, namely hydrogen and oxygen, in the absence of a catalyst, well, you know what a catalyst is because I've already defined a catalyst a short while ago. So remember, this reaction won't be completed even in 10 million years. Can you imagine? Meaning, in other words, unless a catalyst is involved in such a reaction between oxygen and hydrogen to yield water, then the reaction is extremely slow, so that our possibility to get water will be very, very, very minimal. On the other hand, whenever we use a catalyst, in this case, our catalyst is platinum. So the moment platinum is added in the reaction between hydrogen and oxygen, remember, in this case, we are not supposed to wait many years for the reaction between oxygen and hydrogen to be completed. Instead, within a short period of time, within seconds, we can easily get what we desire, that is water. Here, this example can explicitly tells us the importance of catalysts. So from this, we can easily understand that catalysts are the backbones of different reactions that take place in a chemistry laboratory. So, as we've said at the outset, as you remember, not all chemical reactions take place in a similar fashion. Some chemical reactions can occur within a short period of time, but some chemical reactions really require a relatively longer period of time to be completed. So what do people do to get the outcomes within a short period of time? Then they automatically use those substances which are collectively called catalysts. So whenever a catalyst is used, then that catalyst immediately speeds up the reaction that is there between two reactants, namely reactant A and reactant B. That reaction can easily be completed within a short period of time. Then finally, the new product, the expected new product, will ultimately be gotten. So appreciate how catalysts really speed up the rate of a particular chemical reaction. I'm sure you do understand the role that catalysts play. Wonderful. But here, there are certain points that must clearly be understood regarding catalysts. So now, we're talking about chemical catalysts. So for example, in the case of the reaction between hydrogen and oxygen to yield water, well, we used a catalyst called platinum. Okay, platinum. So what can we say about this catalyst? Well, this catalyst is a chemical catalyst, right? So remember, catalysts are of two types, namely those chemical catalysts and those biological catalysts or biochemical catalysts. So what major distinction lies there between the two? Have you ever heard of these two different types of catalysts? Wonderful. So here, catalysts can be classified as positive and negative depending on their tendency to increase or decrease the speed of chemical reactions by decreasing and increasing the activation energy respectively. So first, catalysts generally are classified as positive and negative depending on their tendency to increase or decrease the speed of chemical reactions. So they decrease and increase the speed of chemical reactions by simply influencing the activation energy. So as I've said, catalysts can be either chemical and biological. So those biochemical catalysts that are found, particularly normally those biochemical catalysts that are found in living organisms, such as we human beings, are collectively called enzymes. So I'm sure from your biology class, you learned about enzymes and their characteristics. Particularly, you said that enzymes are, those things that are made of proteins, okay? And enzymes are specific, all right? Enzymes are sensitive to pH, okay? Particularly the majority of the enzymes that are found in your body work at an optimal temperature, meaning here when I say the majority of the enzymes in your body work at an optimal temperature, well, the body's temperature, normally the body temperature of a normal adult person is around 36.5. This is a perfect, or this is a conducive body temperature that helps our enzymes to work in an excellent manner. But when temperature increases, meaning say for example sometimes because of different diseases, temperature, meaning our body temperature, might rise up. and sometimes it might exceed, or it might go beyond the normal body temperature, which is at 6.5 or 7 degrees Celsius. So in that case, that temperature starts to seriously affect our enzymes, particularly our enzymatic activities. And sometimes, again, because of certain reasons, our body temperature might become, low, meaning it drops down below 6.5, and this is not also good for our enzymes to properly work in our bodies, you see. So here enzymes are very specific to temperature, so they're temperature specific, and enzymes are also specific to pH. Enzymes are specific to pH. So what are these? These are the general characteristics of enzymes. I'm sure you remember, biological catalysts in our body, which are collectively called enzymes. So chemical enzymes on one hand, biochemical enzymes on the other hand. Well, normally these are the two classes of catalysts. So let me say a few words about enzymes. Normally enzymes are proteinous substances that catalyze biochemical reactions. Well, enzymes are biological catalysts, you see. So a short while ago, particularly when I classified catalysts, well, I classified catalysts as chemical catalysts and biological catalysts. So those biological catalysts that specifically work in our bodies are collectively called enzymes. And they are proteinous substances which are sensitive to temperature, pH, okay, and what have you. So they're selective and specific. That is, an enzyme can catalyze only one particular reaction. So this is what is meant by specificity. So when we say that a particular enzyme is specific, we mean that that particular enzyme is designed to act on a particular chemical reaction in our body. So it is specific to a certain chemical reaction. So they're specific. For example, the enzyme zymase catalyzes only the fermentation of glucose to ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide, and the enzyme invertase catalyzes only the breakdown of sucrose to glucose and fructose. So by simply raising these two enzymes, namely zymase and invertase, well, the former one catalyzes only the fermentation of glucose to ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide, and the latter one catalyzes only the breakdown of sucrose to glucose and fructose. So you see, zymase, for instance, cannot catalyze the breakdown of sucrose to glucose, and the vice versa. All right. So this simply tells us that enzymes are specific. So unlike enzymes, non-biological catalysts such as platinum catalyze more than one kind of reaction. The other feature of enzymes is their effectiveness. Only a very small amount of enzyme is required to catalyze a given reaction. So let's make the long story short. Biological catalysts, which are collectively called enzymes in our bodies, are specific. But those chemical catalysts that are widely used in chemistry laboratories are not specific. Are not specific, meaning, for example, as in the case of the reaction between oxygen and hydrogen to yield water, well, what is used? Platinum is used, right? Again, platinum can be used in other chemical reactions, particularly whenever there is a very slow chemical reaction, then platinum can be used to speed up that chemical reaction. So what does this tell us? This simply tells us that those chemical catalysts that are widely used in chemistry laboratories are not specific. But when we come to our body or our bodies, well, in our bodies there are different chemical reactions, but for those chemical reactions to actively take place, enzymes are needed, or biochemical catalysts are needed. But these biochemical catalysts completely different from that of the aforementioned chemical catalysts, because each biochemical catalyst is specific. I'm sure things are extremely clear here regarding catalysts. So, when we specifically come to our point, remember, we are on factors that affect the rate of chemical reactions. So thus far, we've been mentioning the well-known or the popular factors that directly influence the rate of any chemical reaction. So let's recapitulate. Well, the first is temperature, and the second is concentration. The third is nature of reactants. The fourth is surface area, and the last one, which is the fifth one, is a catalyst. Okay, now having said this much about the 5 different factors that directly affect the rate of any chemical reaction, now it's time for us to move on to certain theories in connection with chemical reactions, or certain theories in connection with reaction rates. So as far as chemical reaction is concerned, then there are certain theories that are usually forwarded to support it. What are these theories that are forwarded by scientists to explain rate of reaction or rates of reactions? Well, I mean, the first thing, the most theory is called collusion theory. Okay, the collusion theory. So what does the collusion theory states? So the fundamental concept of the collusion theory of rate of reaction is that in order for a reaction to occur between reacting species, namely atoms, ions, or molecules, they must first collide, meaning those atoms or those ions or those molecules must first collide, okay? Must first collide. So in order for a reaction to occur, meaning before any chemical reaction occurs, so before any chemical reaction takes place, first the atoms that are found in both reactants, namely reactant A and reactant B, must collide each other. So this is the reason why such a theory is simply referred to as collusion theory. So collusion, as you know, the term collusion does have something to do with collide. So to collide means to hit two substances on each other. Whenever two substances hit on each other, then we call that collusion. Right? So the theory is called a collusion theory. So the rate of reaction is directly proportional to the number of collusions per second, meaning the frequency of collusion. So the rate of reaction is directly proportional to the number of collusions per second. So according to this theory, meaning according to the collusion theory, the more collusions there are, the faster the rate would be. Okay, or that must be placed in your mind is that according to this theory, or as far as this theory is concerned, well, the more collusions there are, the faster the rate of reaction would be. Okay, so this is what the collusion theory states. Not all collusions between reacting species result in a reaction, and this is because collusions between reactants can be either effective or ineffective. So here, I mean, in collusion theory, two important points must also be understood. And the first vital point that must be understood regarding the collusion theory is that any collusion can be either an effective collusion or an ineffective collusion. So what major difference lies there between an effective collusion and an ineffective collusion? Well, an effective collusion or effective collusions are collusions that result in a reaction to form the desired product. So one can say that collusions in reactants is effective, meaning the collusions of those atoms or those ions or those molecules ultimately form or ultimately produce the desired product. So, a collusion can be effective. So if the desired product is completely gotten, collusions of the atoms or the ions or the molecules in the reactant, then we can immediately say that that collusion is an effective sort of collusion. Okay, that collusion is an effective sort of collusion. But the collusions between the atoms or the ions or the molecules of those reactants do not produce, or if the collusions do not ultimately produce the desired substance, then we immediately say that that collusion is an ineffective kind of collusion. So bear in mind, as far as collusion theory is concerned, well, normally this theory has two important terminologies in it. The first important terminology is known as an effective collusion, and the second terminology is called an ineffective collusion. So that is the major distinction that lies there between effective collusions and non-effective collusions. Very good. Now let's summarize the collusion theory. So for a reaction to occur between reactants, the particles of the reacting substances must collide. 1. 2. The particles of the reacting species must have proper orientation. 2. And the particles of the reactants must collide with energy greater than or equal to the energy of activation. So according to collusion theory, only collusions with proper orientation of reacting species possessing sufficient energy result in a reaction. The collusion can either be linear or non-linear or bent. So in general, we can summarize the collusion theory this way. Well, now let's say a few words about the relationship between temperature and the collusion theory. So according to the kinetic molecular theory, the average kinetic energy of the particles of a substance is directly proportional to the absolute temperature. This means, as the temperature of the reacting species is raised, then the average kinetic energy of the reacting particles increases considerably. So this causes the particles of the reactants to collide more frequently and with greater energy. So this results in an increase in reaction rate. So these points can simply enable you to remember the direct relationship between temperature and collusion theory. The second well-known theory that is posed or that is raised again in connection with rate of chemical reaction is transition state theory. So what does it state? Well, the transition state theory was developed in 1935 simultaneously by Henry Eyring, Meredith Waney, and Evans and Michael Polanyi. It is also referred to as activated complex theory. So according to transition state theory, the collision between two reacting species results in the formation of an activated complex or transition state. So an activated complex or transition state is a short-lived, high-energy state species that is temporarily formed by the collision of reactant molecules before they form products. So, these two, particularly the last two statements can explicitly explain what transition state theory is all about. Well, the other important point regarding chemical reactions, reaction mechanism. So an overall balanced chemical equation does not give any information about how a reaction actually takes place. In many cases, it merely represents the sum of several elementary steps or elementary reactions, a series of simple reactions that represents progress of the overall reaction at the molecular level. So the term for the sequence of elementary steps that leads to product formation is reaction mechanism. So the reaction mechanism is comparable to the simplest description you might give to the route of a trip you plan to take. So the overall chemical equation specifies only the origin and destination, while the reaction mechanism describes the stopovers also. So this is what is meant by reaction mechanism. Well, the other important point is about molecularity of an elementary reaction. So the minimum number of reacting particles, namely molecules, atoms, or ions, that come together to collide in a rate-determining step to form or products is called the molecularity of a reaction. It is the number of reactant molecules taking part in a single step of the reaction. It may be noted that molecularity is a theoretical concept. It cannot be zero, negative, fractional, or infinite, and still imaginary. Well, the other point is about rate determining steps. In a multi-step reaction, all the elementary reactions do not necessarily proceed at equal rates. One of them might be very rapid, moderate, or very slow. The reactants can be converted to products only as fast as they can complete the slowest step. So the slowest step in the sequence of steps tending to the formation of products, and this is called the rate determining step. In other words, the slowest step in the mechanism determines the overall rate of the reaction. So because the rate determining step limits the rate of the overall reaction, its rate low represents the rate low for the overall reaction. For example, the reaction of nitrogen dioxide with fluorine is given by the equation: nitrogen dioxide gas reacts with fluorine gas to yield nitrogen dioxide. Well, these are some of the vital points that must be remembered regarding this unit, particularly regarding this fourth unit is concerned. So I'm sure this revision session helped you to recapitulate some of the points that you have forgotten. Now, before we wind up in our discussion, or before we wind up our revision session, well, let's attempt some questions, and let me be certain whether you've followed me strictly so far or not. So now let's directly move on to some of the questions that I want you to attempt. All right, dear students, thus far we've been revising chemical kinetics, what it is, and the different things in connection with it. Now let's attempt some questions that arise from this unit. Let's get straight to it. The first question says, the rate of a reaction A decreases with time, B does not change with time, C is independent of time, D increases with time. So which one do you think is the correct answer here? Well, the correct answer here is A, decreases with time. Well, now let's move on to the second question, which is question number 2. Well, it says, an increasing in which of the following increases the rate of a reaction? A, concentration of reactants and surface area of solid reactants. B, temperature of a reaction. C, pressure of gaseous reactants. D, all of the above. Well, the answer of this question is D, all of the above, because as we have repeatedly said in our discussion, well, all the aforementioned things such as concentration of reactants, surface area, temperature, pressure, all these are factors that increase the rate of a reaction or rates of reactions. So if you answer this question by saying D, then you're correct. Now let's move on to question number 3. It says, the rate of chemical reactions depend on A, nature of reactants, B, temperature in catalysts, C, concentration of reactants in surface area, D, all of these. Well, this is also a very simple question. The answer of this question is D, which is all of the above, because all the aforementioned things such as nature of reactants, temperature, catalysts, concentration of reactants, and surface area are all factors that directly affect the rate or the rates of chemical reactions. So because of this reason, the answer of this question is D. Number 4, for reactions involving reactants in different phases, namely solid, liquid, or gas, which factor significantly affects the rates of most reactions? A, temperature, B, surface area of reactants, C, pressure, D, none of these. Well, the answer for this question is B, because again, in our discussion a short while ago, we said that surface area does have a direct connection with those heterogeneous reactions. Okay, so over here, normally this question tries to indicate indirectly those heterogeneous reactions, those reactants that exist in different phases, such as solid, liquid, or gas. So we said in our vision that surface area does have a direct connection with heterogeneous sort or with heterogeneous kind of chemical reactions. So the answer of this question is B. Now coming to the last question, which is question number 5. An increase in temperature generally increases the rate of A, an exothermic reaction, B, an endothermic reaction, C, a homogeneous reaction, D, a heterogeneous reaction. Well, if you answer this question by saying B, which is an endothermic reaction, then you are correct. Alright students, that's all I have for today, and I hope this revision session helped you a lot. So next time we'll keep in touch with other units, particularly the remaining units of grade 11 chemistry, namely Unit 5 and Unit 6. Till then, it's goodbye.